morning, everyone. I'm slowly going to adjust my voice and my tone to fit the microphone here. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to be here with us at the inaugural, first time in the history of time, East Metro Economic Prosperity Forum. I want to thank all of you for, give me a big round of applause. What we have found is that the East Metro region is a vibrant region that is growing, that is exciting, and we thought this would be a great time to bring all of you, the leaders of our region, together to discuss this growth and discuss how we can grow together in a prosperous manner that allows everyone to be able to win. You know, no one's excluded, everybody's included. It's an exciting time to be here in the county, and I'm glad to be a part of the East Metro Economic Alliance to help grow this region and to help speak for it, because I think it's very exciting. But before we begin, as we begin, I want to thank all of you, of course, for being here. And I want to introduce our first speaker, who many of you know, I'm sure all of you know, is Congressman Earl Blumenauer, who's a lifelong resident of Portland and has devoted his entire career to public service through years of local. But now, you gotta realize, I practiced really hard on this whole bio. We're gonna have streamers and sound cannons and.
These people know me too well.
So I should say no to the confetti. I should stop the confetti. Give a big round of applause for Congressman Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. It won't work. No amount of gussing up the resume. Too many of these people have known me for too long. I wanted to be here because I think this is a special moment for some of the challenges that a number of you have been working on in this community. It's been frustrating for me over time watching what has happened to an area that I grew up in that was shortchanged by a variety of people in the past. They were expedient. We didn't have time to plan. It would have been too much trouble for developers to put in sewers at the time they were developing subdivisions. And, septic tanks, cesspool work just as well and cost about as much. Except we ended up forcing people out here to have to go pay twice because our leaders at the time didn't have the foresight, and sadly it was some folks in the development community that just wanted to move on and didn't want to deal with it. And people out here paid the price, having to put in sewers essentially twice. It would have cost, actually probably would have saved money over time. The planning that didn't take place actually is part of the secret weapon here. There's no area of the region that has larger parcels, supersized lots, a blank canvas in many respects, affordable housing going forward at a time of escalating housing costs throughout the region. You're watching some of the land take place in terms of some exciting job growth. But as Sheila and I were talking a moment ago, the key here is to be able to pair the job growth with people who work there who want to live and stay in this community rather than commute in or commute out. And you have an opportunity to do this unlike anybody else in the region. Kind of exciting. The diversity that has resulted in part because some of the growth in the region happened faster than we thought would happen in terms of some of the Portland neighborhoods, for instance, but the increased diversity out here is going to be a strength going forward. It already is a strength. The east part of the metropolitan area looks like the rest of the world, much more so than other parts. And that's something that business cares about. That's something that families care about. And you have the opportunity to capitalize on this. And make no mistake, we do have some serious problems. One of the things that drives me crazy, these property tax initiatives came from East County back in the day, but it has created a property tax system where my constituents who live here with identical homes to people who live in some of the neighborhoods that have increased in value more rapidly pay higher property taxes. I mean, is it any wonder we have to work so hard to get bond measures passed for Centennial or Mount Hood Community College? Now, that's going to be a struggle for another day. Convincing voters that what we were saying at the time is you don't want to do this is hard to unwrap. But I think that's an opportunity going forward. But we don't have to wait for that. And you're bringing together a really terrific group of people, a terrific group of organizations and people who are ready to move forward, and in many cases already are. This is testimony to it. New avenues. What's happened here with the alternative school for children who are at risk of falling, well, are in some cases falling through the cracks. This magnificent new facility. I think it's terrific. I, unfortunately, am scheduled to do some more things at my old alma mater, Centennial, and dealing in Gresham with some of the initiatives in terms of agriculture and food waste. There's some great stuff happening out there. So I'm not going to be able to sort of camp out here. I wish that I could, but Jason Little on our team will be taking careful notes and telling me where to look on the video. But I just wanted to warn you that I want to be invited out for the first annual reunion of this group, for us to talk about what came out of your work today and to look forward to things that we can do with a partnership. Someday, your federal government's going to come to its senses. I promise. We're working to get you a better Congress. There is light at the end of a variety of tunnels. And I'm looking forward to being part of being your partner at the federal level, to the extent to which some people out here still know me, and I have some credibility to try and be a booster for what you're doing, and be able to track this progress. This means a lot to me as somebody who's watched challenges out here. But this is one of the brightest spots I've seen for a long time. I congratulate you and look forward to following up on where we go from here. Thank you very much.
I do appreciate the Honorable Earl Blumenauer, even though I didn't get to say my nice full introduction spiel that I was practicing in front of the mirror last night. But that's quite all right. Thank you again for being here. And as you'll hear throughout the event, we'll be thanking our sponsors throughout. This was really a collaborative effort. It was a collaborative group of sponsors, and we'll be thanking you throughout the event because we really appreciate you making this happen. I'm going to introduce a couple of people, and we'll be moving right along with the with the objectives and the outcomes for this event. But I want to just quickly tell you a little bit about the genesis of this event. This event really started because of a question. It started with a question about what would happen. What would happen if we got the Amazon headquarters out here? What would happen if all the parcels out at the Tripp property were fully sold and used? What would happen if some of the additional housing came online today? Are we ready for those things? Are we ready for another 5,000 employees to be out in the region? Where they're going to live? Where are the kids going to go to school? Are the schools ready for that? Is there enough room in the schools for them? Never enough teachers? Is there enough places for the teachers to get lunch at lunchtime? When all those things. Is there enough transportation to get people to and from there? Are there enough stores? Are there enough leisure activities? Can people live, work, and play in this region if everything that we're planning for comes into place? And when that question was asked, we did not have an answer for it. The answer really to that was, I think so. But we didn't quite know. And everyone who's in this room is all part of all the great work that's going on. There's great things going on in Gresham. There's great things going on in Troutdale, Fairview, Wood Village. There's great things happening and we're really, really excited about. And then we start thinking about at a regional level, at a high level, are we ready for growth? Are we ready for this next phase of the region? And so we thought we would bring everyone together to not only ask that question, but to go a little bit further and say, how can we be prepared and how can we make sure that the prosperity of the region is shared equitably amongst everyone at all levels? Thus, the East Metro Economic Prosperity Forum was born. And thanks to all the work of the initial steering committee and subcommittees and multiple committees and I think triple committees, we are here today and we're excited that all of you are being a part of this collaborative effort. And which is why even in the program, it's collaborative, where you'll see multiple people up here speaking and talking and all of us working together because we really wanted to create an interactive forum. So I will bring up to the stage next Mr. Stephen Ames here from NXT Consulting. I always say Next Consulting. Okay, well, it is Next. So Next Consulting Group, who we've commissioned along with Dr. Sheila Martin from the Institute of Metropolitan Studies to really help us with this process as we grow together. So I'm going to bring up Mr. Stephen Ames to talk about today's agenda and what are the outcomes of this event.
Thanks, Jarvis. And thanks, everybody, for the chance to be here. It is really exciting to be out here. I think it was maybe, I hate to say it, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, I worked on the original Envision Gresham project, which was as part of the kind of work that I do is helping communities anticipate and plan for the longer-term future. And that was one of the first efforts, and it was a very successful one as well, too. I see a couple heads nodding who are probably as old as I am. They say when it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people. Those people who let the future happen, those people who make the future happen, and those people who wonder what happened. The purpose of this event, this Prosperity Forum, and the work that falls out of it today is obviously to help the East Metro area be in that last category of making the future happen. I think you already heard a couple remarks from Earl about maybe how past decisions in the past have, put an extra burden on this part of the metro area in terms of its future planning. And beginning today, we really hope with the dialogue that we're having and the ideas that we're generating, we're calling them strategic initiatives, that we will begin to not only sort of address some of those past mistakes or not so wise decisions and replace them with ones that really help put the East Metro area on the vanguard. So it's my pleasure to be here to help facilitate the day for you. Our agenda, there isn't a brief agenda in your packet. You don't need to pull it out now, but we're going until 2 o'clock today. We're going to start with a keynote speaker from our guest speaker, Jeremy Hayes, and I'll introduce him in just a second. And then we're going to have a sequence of presentations by myself, by Jarvis Hall, and by Dr. Sheila Martin to help provide you some context for the conversations you're having. We're going to look very briefly at some of the really big trends out there that are pushing us into the future. We'll also look at some of the initiatives that are already underway here in the East Metro area. And finally, Sheila is going to share some really fascinating information about trends of change that are unfolding here in the East Metro area, some of which we know you're quite familiar with. Some of them might be new to you. After that, there'll be a brief break mid-morning, a chance to return a call, grab a coffee, use the restrooms, whatever. And then we're going to go right into breakout sessions, and that's really when you're going to do the heavy lifting. We have 4 themes or focus areas, as we're calling them today. Each one of you have signed up for one of those. We're going to have some breakout conversations. And in a word, your mission, should you choose to accept it, dating myself again there, is that what we want you to do is to come up with a handful of strategic initiatives for that area. For example, if you're in the area on housing choices, what are some of the bigger ideas out there that we could push forward that we can then come back in a year and say, let's see what's happened in the interim. One invitation to you when you have those conversations is we're really looking for you to get a little bit out of the box, be a little creative. For example, I'm working up north in the Wenatchee Valley with Washington. They have 2 cities there. And one of the big ideas that came out of a very similar forum like this was, and I'm not necessarily suggesting it for you, but was that the 2 cities merge because they have 2 of everything there. It's very inefficient. And they are actually on the pathway now to creating what they call one community. That's the kind of creativity we're hoping that you can generate here for whatever those ideas might be in terms of industry and entrepreneurship, housing choices, and the other focus areas that you'll be talking about. When you come back after that, right after that session, there'll be a kind of a working lunch, a chance for you to network. If you, in your group, haven't finished up your work, it'll be a chance to quickly wrap it up. We're going to take the results of your conversations in those 4 themes and bring them back to the full group. And at that time, technology permitting, and then you know what they say, never work with kids, pets, or technology. So we're testing out some new systems here today. We're going to do some electronic polling using your smartphone, and we hope to walk out of here today with, say, 20 or 25 initiatives, but we want to look at what are the top 4. And for each of our areas of conversation, what's that one big idea that if we started pushing it today, when we come back in 1 year, we're going to say, man, are we glad that we did that, because look what it started to make happen. We'll wrap up and have you out of here by 2 o'clock. So this is a little bit of a hot house. We're asking you to think on your feet, to not go too deep into analyzing ideas. This is about brainstorming, getting out good ideas, sharing those ideas with your colleagues, and then seeing what we come up with at the end of the day. So I just wanted, sorry? Okay, great, good. All right, that's it. He just told me to shut up. So looking forward to working with you today, and I think you're going to have a good time. Thanks so much.
But I did it in a professional manner, and it was very collaborative how we did it, because me and Dr. Martin did that. So I would like to bring up Betty Dominguez from Home Forward, who is going to introduce our keynote speaker, and we want to give her a big round of applause because we really appreciate Home Forward's commitment to this event, the sponsorship of the event, and as well as Betty's work on both the steering committee and on the logistics subcommittee to help make this happen. So she was part of multiple meetings, conference calls, and everything else to help make sure this event was exciting. So it was more than just a sponsorship. We really appreciate the amount of time that she's personally put into the event. So Betty, go ahead.
Okay, I'll take the confetti now. So welcome everybody. We're so happy to see you here. As Jarvis mentioned, I am a board member of EME. I'm also the director of East County Relations for Home Forward, and we were very happy to co-sponsor this event. I'm also Metro Councilor District 2 representing Clackamas County, and I just want to do a shout out to Aaron Hubert, who I saw in the audience, Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club, whose board I was on when we built this fabulous club, and I want to thank you for hosting us. Aaron, where are you? Wave your hand. There she is. Thank you. Thank you for having us. So, Jeremy Hayes, let me tell you about him. He's an independent consultant specializing in complex collaborations, community development, stakeholder engagement, and social equity, which is very personally important to me. Jeremy has a master's degree in city planning and a master's in international development from UC Berkeley. He graduated with honors from University of Illinois with a BA in sociology. Jeremy has deep experience designing and implementing public-private partnerships to drive broadly shared economic development. At the request of mayors in both cities, Jeremy pioneered multi-party agreements to guide the implementation of tens of millions of dollars of economic stimulus funds in Portland and Seattle. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. He has drafted federal workforce policy and has helped local agencies craft community benefit agreements on single parcel developments. As a nonprofit executive, he built networks of leaders across the country to refine models of inclusive, sustainable economic and workforce development, which of course we're very interested in. As a project manager for the Governor's Oregon Solutions Program, he helped diverse stakeholders across the state forge collaborative solutions to thorny problems. Jeremy's consulting clients include local governments, businesses, and nonprofits. Examples of recent projects include leading a multi-stakeholder process to develop social equity policy options for city agreements with businesses and provide city services. On another project, Jeremy is helping a home builder raise and deploy a $50 million investment, just a few zeros difference, to fund an investment fund, designed to produce green and affordable infill housing in the Pacific Northwest. It's my pleasure to introduce Jeremy. We have Oregon Solutions in common and past lives. So welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you, Betty. Thanks to Jarvez and the East Metro Economic Alliance. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. Figure out where to put my notes. So I've been asked to come and just share a few observations from my experience that might be helpful to you all as you dig into the data and your work groups. So I'm going to do that, but I wanted to just tell you just a couple more things about myself so that you get a sense of where I'm coming from, sort of my background and how I ended up doing the work that I do. So I grew up poor, welfare, public housing, single mom, and I was really mad about that. I remember being young and just having a real visceral feeling of being cramped or crowded from the limitation of opportunities. And it was really frustrating. And as a young man, I lashed out. And I did things that were probably unhelpful to the broader community. Thanks, Jarvez. Is this going to be a better way to... Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Does that work? Yeah. Really? Now I'm going to be responsible for killing the laptop.
It is just fine.
It's going to be fine? Yes. All right, great. I trust you. Thank you so much. Does it look... Are you ready to jump up and save it? You want just another inch, maybe? Yeah. All right. I really don't want to be that guy. I'm hoping to be helpful. I don't want to break the technology. So I was frustrated and angry, and I was lashing out, and I was doing things to try to get some prosperity or some material wealth, and to try to get some power or self-determination. And that was a limited path, and fortunately, I was able to turn away from that. But one of the things, even in the midst of the frustration that I was in and the anger that I was feeling, I noticed that my peers of color had it worse than I did. Right? We were doing the same thing. We were kind of running in the same circles and doing the same stuff that was unhelpful or unhealthy, and they were getting harsher treatment, both in school and from run-ins with the police. And, you know, I got second chances. I got first chances that my peers often didn't get. And that was white privilege in action, even for a poor kid from the projects. So I noticed that early, and I started turning my attention to, well, what can we do together? How can we band together to try to do something about these conditions and maybe free ourselves from some of this frustration that comes from a lack of opportunity and a lack of prosperity? I turned to community organizing, and I did that for a number of years, working in communities, low-income communities and communities of color, basically working on the belief that if we come together, that we could create the conditions for safety and opportunity and prosperity and happiness in our own communities. I really enjoyed that work, but after a while, I found myself feeling like there was still something more that we could do. And I went back to grad school to get technical skills. I really wanted to be involved in the crafting of solutions. I wanted to understand how systems worked instead of just advocating for them. I felt like a lot of times as a community organizer, we were kind of banging on the doors and saying, solve this problem, but we didn't always have the solutions. And I really wanted to dig into the solutions. So I went back to graduate school and got the degrees that Betty was so nice to talk about, and got involved in some of these large-scale collaborative economic development initiatives. But I brought forward this couple of beliefs. We're better together, Social equity needs to be at the core. And there are brilliant solutions out there. We just have to stay on it and keep working. And so I want to do, I was asked to take a few minutes and just share a few things from the work that I've done that might be helpful to you all here today. I hope they're helpful. If they're not, let them go. It's okay. And if they are helpful, then I'll be greatly pleased. Here are the 3 things I want to share with you. I'm just looking for us. There we go. Looking for the timing. 3 things that I want to share, 3 observations from my work that might be helpful to you. Stuff that I've learned about what makes collaborative economic prosperity initiatives like the one that you're embarking on really work. I'll give a preview. Lead with equity. Everything gets better. The whole region benefits. Everybody benefits when we lead with social equity. I'm going to talk about that. That's number 1. The second, build on your strengths. Build on the assets that are already in your community. And the third, show up with your best self. This is a project of human relationships, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's the preview, and I'm going to dive right into it. So the whole region benefits when we lead with equity. Right? And before I get into talking about that, I just want to define what I mean by equity. Different communities define social equity a little bit differently. The whole field has been emerging over the last 20 years and a lot over the last 10 years, and this is good. We need local work on definitions, but sometimes we can get crosswise with each other because we're using the same words, but we don't actually have shared language and understanding. So I'm going to define my terms, and I suggest when you all use these terms that are kind of new and getting bantied about, that you also make an effort to say what it is that you really mean so that we're working with the same languages. When I talk about equity, I'm talking about outcomes. I'm talking about disparities in the way that disparities in opportunity and in material circumstances. The Center for Assessment and Policy Development has a definition that I like. They say racial equity. Racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted, in a statistical sense, how one fares. Does that make sense? Yes. Talking about outcomes. It's the condition, equity is the state of race, ethnicity, gender, and other characteristics are no longer factors in the distribution of opportunity. Right? So the work of equity then, in this definition, means the elimination of policies and practices, cultural messages, attitudes that reinforce or even fail to eliminate those disparities and outcomes. Right? And the work of equity is also about the creation of policies and practices and cultural messages that directly try to eliminate those disparities and outcomes between people of different social groups. Does that make sense to you? Is that a fair working definition of equity for now? I don't know what I'm going to say next, but it's okay. One thing that I think is useful to note is that that is different than diversity and engagement, which are both really important factors to getting to social equity, to changing disparate outcomes and well-being, but by themselves are not sufficient. And a lot of times we do good work on diversity, or we do the right kind, engage the right people in the conversation and feel like we're done, or feel like that's good, and that is good. This definition that I'm using, though, we're talking about the outcomes. Let's see the outcomes change. Right? So, and this last little definition, I really like Angela Glover Blackwell. She founded and leads an organization called Policy Link, which has been a leader in the equity movement for a long time. She has a poetic definition of equity that comes from their Equity Manifesto. She writes, "This is equity, just and fair inclusion in a society in which we can all participate, prosper, and reach our full potential. Unlocking the promise of the nation by unleashing the promise in us all." Sound like a decent definition? So what does it mean that, why do we need to lead with equity? Why isn't it enough to consider equity or have equity in the program or do some good economic development work and figure out how to also make sure that that gets to wide groups of folks? The truth is that when we lead with equity, everything else gets better and follows along. And when we don't lead with social equity, we often accidentally make things worse. I'm going to read to you a statement by the president of the National League of Cities. How many people are familiar with the National League of Cities? This is not a radical organization by any stretch, right? Here's the president of the National League of Cities. "In today's rapidly changing demographic, social, environmental, and economic environment, the need for equitable economic development programs is particularly urgent. According to the Brookings Institution, states and localities spend $50 to $80 billion a year in tax breaks and incentives in the name of economic development, despite a mountain of evidence showing that tax incentives produce mostly marginal returns. These traditional approaches to economic development by local governments have not always benefited all populations, and in many cases, the policies and programs have particularly neglected or even shortchanged people of color, immigrants, and low-income communities. When cities instead invest in making economies more equitable from the bottom up or from the middle class out, economic growth is likely to be better for all residents. And that growth is more likely to be sustained over longer periods of time. Cities need to be intentional about targeting their economic development programs, funding, and policies at the specific populations and neighborhoods that are increasingly distant from the growth sectors of their regional and city economies. That's Matt Zone, President, National League of Cities. Metro understands this really well. Betty, I was looking at the 2016 strategic plan on it's a strategic plan to advance racial equity, diversity, inclusion. And written in there, it says the Metro staff and council members were clear. By addressing the barriers experienced by people of color, we will effectively also identify solutions and remove barriers for other disadvantaged groups. The result will be that all people in the 25 cities and 3 counties of the Portland region will experience better outcomes. This is borne out by economic research and data. And I'm going to be here all day, so if you want citations and other things, come and hit me up, and I'm happy to give them to you. Here are a few things: the Policy Link, the Urban Land Institute, National League of Cities, again, not like what you think of as sort of left radical organizations, have done the analysis, and the economic data shows racial and economic inclusion give regions a competitive edge. Right? Diversity is a competitive advantage. Congressman Earl Blumenauer just stated that. This region has got that. And reducing inequality actually promotes growth. Right? So like one way to grow your economy is simply to reduce inequality. Inequality is a drag on the entire region and the equality. It's not just bad for the people that are experiencing it, the people that are constrained by that lack of opportunity. It's bad for all of us. And my experience has been, when you come together to think up strategic initiatives for how we all get better together, lead with equity, it's a good strategy. Maybe better off. I'm curious just to get, part of my job here is being like the warm-up act. Warm up. So we're going to get our brains working just a little bit before you go into your strategic group. So I'm just curious, I'd love to hear just a little bit, are there disparities? Are there differential outcomes across social groups that you all are intent on addressing here today? Just like popcorn out a few of them. You can raise your hand or you can just shout them out. What are some of the disparities that you think you might want to work on?
Access to family wage jobs.
Thank you.
Access to capital.
Access to capital for businesses, yeah. Thank you.
Transportation.
Transportation equity, yes.
Only more affordable housing for people rather than just infill with more expensive.
Yeah, making sure that people have access to affordable housing, despite who they are. Other folks?
Impacting health outcomes through social determinants.
Yes, impacting health outcomes through social determinants. Great.
Education opportunities.
And education opportunities. Thank you. So here are some of these, again, some of the places where you all might find like there's a disparity there, we want to do something. And from my experience, when we put that front and center in our initiative, everything else gets better along the way. That's the first observation I wanted to share with you. Here's the second. You have an opportunity to build on strengths, to build on what's working in this region, to build on assets. And it's interesting, but time and again, I've noticed that we often don't do this. Problem solving is a 2-step process, right? There's problem identification and solution making. Most humans, the vast majority of humans, are much better at one of these than the other. And guess which one it is? Problem identification, right? We're good at that. Our minds are sort of oriented to notice the negative. Have you ever heard that like one negative comment carries the same weight as 10 positive ones? You might feel that. You might get complimented regularly all day long, all week long, but you get that little piece of negative feedback, and that's what's keeping you up at night, right? We're just wired this way. So, we come into the room and there's something going on. I do this with my kids. I have an 8-year-old and 11-year-old boys, and so there's always something going on. And I come into the room like, what's wrong? I'm never like, what's working? What's right? But oftentimes, that's the right question. We have to train ourselves to look for strengths and assets, or what the authors Dan and Chip Heath called Bright Spots in this business book called Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Bright Spots is this concept of like, train your mind to stop looking at the problem and all of the difficulties and actually look for the beautiful stuff. Look for the stuff that actually seems to be working now. They have a lovely story about bright spots that they put into their book. It involves an aid worker from Save the Children International was allowed to go and set up an office in Vietnam in the early 90s. And the government was kind of like, you can come in, but you've got 6 months to make a difference or you're out of here. The project was malnutrition among children. So this aid worker knew that malnutrition was a result of large systemic factors: poverty, sanitation, education. And they had studied this problem quite extensively, and they knew that like 6 months is not a lot of time to be able to move the needle on such intractable problems. But what this aid worker did, because he was had this orientation, fortunately, towards looking at what works, went out to the villages that they were working in and started talking to the mothers and saying, well, are there children in this village that appear to be better nourished than some of the other children? And there are some kids that are kind of big and they're growing healthy, and well, let's go talk and see like why is that happening? And they observed mealtime and food prep in these particular families where their kids were better off. And they found like there are some practices here. There are some habits, there are some familial practices that are actually resulting in better nutrition for these kids. So let's get these mothers together with all the other mothers and just start doing this stuff together and start transferring some of this knowledge. In 6 months, 65% of the children in those dozen villages or so that this aid worker were working in were showing signs of improved nutrition. And that was directly, the result of focusing on what works. In community economic development, we need to do this as well. And we've had frameworks for doing this for a while. In the late 80s and early 90s, a school of practice came out of Chicago called Asset-Based Community Development, ABCD. Anybody familiar with that? Right? And that formal practice is much more about, let's do some asset mapping, literally sitting down and thinking about what are the assets in our community, where are our strengths, right? And mapping those out. That framework suggests that assets are often individuals, there's 5 of these coming, associations, institutions, real estate, physical property, right? And then the connections, the relationships within the community. I'm going to ask you a little bit to identify some assets in the community so you can get warmed up a little bit. But I want to tell you one more story, because sometimes it's not just as simple as looking for what works. It's kind of like being able to identify that diamond in the rough or the potential that exists given the assets you have in the community. How many people are familiar with anchor institution strategies or that concept? Heard that? Okay, so this is something that's been developing in the field of economic prosperity and collaborative work. The idea is anchor institutions are, let me find my definition for you. They're enterprises often, like universities, hospitals, maybe the port, right, that are rooted in local communities by mission or sunk capital and relationships. Like they're not going anywhere. They're not just going to pick up and, Mount Hood Community College is going to pick up and move to Texas. That doesn't make any sense. So these are anchor institutions. They're anchored in your community. And what we found is that with the proper incentives and motivation, anchor institutions have the economic potential to leverage their assets to help generate revenues and promote local private sector development through things like using their purchasing power, right? Hiring from the community, providing workforce training, incubating new businesses, the variety of things that can work like this. There's been a lot of work done on this model at a lot of places in the country, but a lot of it traces back to some work that was done about 10 or 15 years ago now in Cleveland, Ohio. It's actually called the Cleveland model. And so I want to tell you a short story that Ted Howard, who runs an organization called the Democracy Collaborative by the University of Maryland, does a lot of work on these anchor institution strategies. And according to Ted, some years ago, he was at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, which is a world-renowned medical institution. People come from all over the world there to get treatment and to study. And it's right in a very low-income neighborhood in Cleveland. And Ted had been working with this low-income community and looking at wealth-building strategies and prosperity strategies. And he was in the Cleveland Clinic in the cafeteria and was eating a salad and was like, does this lettuce come from exactly, right? I did a little research, and there's no lettuce, no commercial lettuce being grown at that time in Ohio at all. It was being imported. And so Ted thought, there seems like there's an opportunity here. Here's an institution that's buying, I don't know what the number is, lots of lettuce and other produce every year, and they're buying it from somebody else. Is there an opportunity to buy that from the community somehow and to benefit this adjacent low-income community? Through a series of deals with hospitals and other large institutions, they created a new business called Green City Growers, and they built what has become the nation's largest industrial scale greenhouse in an urban core. This greenhouse is like multiple football fields. They're growing lettuce. The business is a worker-owned cooperative. All those workers make living wages. They have great benefits packages, right? And they're going strong now, several years later, working with that anchor institution, making sure that as they meet their needs to provide fresh food to their patients and researchers and visitors, that they're also helping the community that they're based in grow and prosper. These are anchor institution strategies, and you may have ideas about anchor institutions and what they might be able to do here. But before we move on, in the spirit of warming up our brains, I want to ask about assets, strengths, what's working now in the East Metro area. Just throw them out, just to get warmed up. What are some of the strengths that you're working with here today? What are some of the assets in your community? Yes?
Youth.
Youth. Youth are an asset for sure. Others? The diversity of the region.
Different ethnic backgrounds and cultures.
Absolutely. Thank you. Others? Yeah.
A strong manufacturing sector.
Have a strong manufacturing sector. Excellent. Other assets and strengths?
Location.
The location. The location itself, proximity to transportation hubs and port and the city of Portland, et cetera. Other assets? Remember, they're individuals, associations, institutions.
Passionate, committed mayor.
Passionate and committed mayor.
I keep thinking of the Rosewood Initiative, which brings a lot of people from minority communities together. It's like just down the street from here.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Having a community college.
And the community college. Great. So these are some of the strengths and assets that you have. And again, I just want to encourage you, it's not always easy to move out of that kind of judging, problem identification mind and kind of open up to looking at what works and the strengths. But that's one encouragement. I'm about out of time. I have one more observation I want to share with you really quickly, which is this. These things work better when people bring their best selves forward into the conversation. You're going to get great tools and training for collaboration or great structures for coming together and doing the work, which is cooperating to align resources to produce some outcomes around common objectives. My experience has been, and it's sort of the research bears it out, is that the single most important factor for effective teams or collaborative environments is the shared sense that it's okay to be yourself, to speak up, to share your idea, to share your fear, right? To share your lack of knowledge, and that you won't be criticized, right? And that you won't be judged or made to feel inferior in any way. There's an interesting, I don't have time to go into it, but there's a project that Google did called Project Aristotle, where they spent gobs of money trying to figure out what makes a good collaborative team. They brought in loads of researchers, they spent a lot of time on this, and they had a really hard time coming up with, like, why do some teams produce better than others? And they could, in the end, they boiled it down to two kind of basic things. Equal talk time. Nobody's dominating, nobody's hanging back in the corner. And then this sense of psychological safety, or this sense that there's confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. The team is characterized by interpersonal trust, mutual respect, where people are comfortable being themselves. So I just want to encourage you, we don't have time to get into it and talk about it as much, but my friend and boss, Van Jones, I helped him build nonprofits. He's a TV personality now, but he used to be a civil rights and environmental leader. He used to tell us, just stay human. Stay human. Listen with empathy. Speak authentically, and prepare to be surprised. There's beauty and genius and possibility lurking everywhere. So thank you for your time. I know you guys are going to make some friends and have a great day and come up with some wonderful strategic initiatives, and I'll be around all day. If I can be helpful to you in any way, I'd be happy to do it. Thanks again.
Jeremy, thank you so much. We really appreciate everything that you brought us. Some really good things to think about. I do want everyone here to get a little bit more excited about the assets that we have here in the region, because we have some really cool things that we're doing out here, some of which I'll talk about as we move over into our panel presentations. But be excited about the really cool things that we have out here. We have assets, and we were very intentional about having this event here in this location because it gets to show off one of the great assets in the region that was a result of a collaboration between multiple parties, multiple entities, multiple dollar amounts from different areas. And now we have this cool, wonderful space that was not here 5 years ago. You know, we could come in and have this meeting, and kids have a place to come together. I remember going to the Boys and Girls Club when I was younger. It was a safe place, but this is a real jewel in the region, and so that's why we were very intentional about having it in this location. So we're going to talk about some emerging trends, a little bit of a snapshot of the region, and then have our current conditions report. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephen first to go over his.
Thanks so much, Jarvez, and thanks, Jeremy, for those presentations too. I was kind of thinking, you know, if a rising tide lifts all boats, then maybe conversely, when everybody's on the boat, the tide will rise faster. So I think it's a good message, and just a shout out to that notion that when you have that kind of diversity, there's such a richness to take advantage of. And as I think when Sheila does her presentation, she'll give you some facts and figures to put behind that phenomenon. As Jarvez says, we're gonna do three things here. The first two are kind of quick, and that's me and Jarvez, and then we're going to turn it over to Sheila to share some really interesting information. I'm kind of the futurist in the crowd, and my task in this stage setting for you is to talk a little bit about the big world of change that's out there. And some of these things may not be the positive, you know, hopeful trends that we all like to flag on, but some actually are. The point I want to make in just presenting this briefly is that there is a big world of change out there. And as you start setting your sights on the future and developing these strategic ideas to move with in the East Metro area, it's always important to remember that there is a bigger world around us, and that it really behooves us to pay attention to how that world is changing so that we can position this part of the metro area to be a little bit more effective. The global and national drivers, you've all heard of megatrends. We don't need to spend a lot on this, but changing population growth and migrations, shifting generational diversity between the boomers like me and the millennials, and now the iGens. Is everybody familiar with the iGens coming up? Those little carbon units that are plugged into their devices. Economic restructuring is something that's happening really big. I mean, we've all heard about globalization of the economy. There are counter trends now to globalization out there that we're all paying attention to see how that changes. Lots of changes in terms of the environment, natural resources, stresses on our environment from climate change and other factors. But at the same time, advances in science and technology, artificial intelligence being one, that are truly mind-boggling. And just think of the fact that 20 years ago, probably for many of us 10 years ago, we didn't have those smartphones. Just think of how that one technology has just changed everything for us. We have our computers in the palm of our hand, and it literally has caused a lot of change and a lot of opportunities and a few stresses there too. Also, medicine and healthcare, big changes and trends out there. The point I like to make that any one of these global megatrends, and they're happening across the planet, not just in the US, any one of them has the power to change the world we live in. But when you consider the fact that it's all unfolding at the same time, you realize, as one futurist has said, that we really well and truly live at the hinge of history. This is a very pivotal time, and that sense of change can be very destabilizing, but it can also create lots of opportunities. Oregon is a reflection of what's happening globally. It's in different ways, but population growth is happening big here. I think by the year 2030, I think we're going to be about 4.4 million people here, so we're growing fast. Lots of in-migration. Oregon is one of the key destinations for in-migration these days in the tracking of license plates or where they're heading. We've got people moving here for a lot of reasons, including all of our amenities and assets that we do have here. Our population is aging like the rest of the country, but we're aging faster here in Oregon. I don't mean us individually aging faster. It may feel like that on some mornings, but rather, and statistically, our population is aging because so many people are moving here to retire. We have one of the fastest growing economies. My hometown of Bend is the fastest growing city on the West Coast right now. So change is happening in Oregon as well as statewide. On the plus side, and although I know some developers and builders might sometimes think it's not a great advantage, but our land use planning system is rigorous and robust and does give us tools to plan for better cities that other places don't have. They just don't have that certainty that we have here. And also there's a lot of resilience planning happening in the state of Oregon right now. I mean, we're all thinking about the Cascadian subduction earthquake, 1 in 3 chances in the next 50 years. Not a pleasant thought, but there's a lot happening out there, particularly at the state level, and beginning to prepare for that. I've been working on the coast lately too, and you can bet your bottom dollar that a lot of coastal cities are thinking very seriously about how do we deal for that. So there are tools in our Oregon toolkit that other states don't have, and we are, I would say, on the balance, better prepared for a changing world than a lot of other states in the U.S. Finally, what I call metropolitan wildcards. Metropolitan meaning that among the many trends out there with our population as more people are moving into cities, into urban areas. East Metro being an example of that. And some of the trends that are happening out there, much of it driven by technology, really is manifesting itself most in where people congregate and live, which is in the metropolitan areas. You're all familiar with the Internet of Things. If you have Alexa or Google Assistant or Siri or whatever, you know that technology is now coming into our homes, that our homes are going to be more and more wired for the future. Cities are doing the same thing in terms of planning for infrastructure and transportation. Smart technology offers a lot of potential to harmonize what has been somewhat of a chaotic process, as Earl was talking about, of trying to catch up with growth. And so the technologies really offers a lot. On the downside, or at least on the challenging side, artificial intelligence. If you've listened to Bill Gates lately, or Elon Musk, or people like that, we're getting warnings that artificial intelligence carries a lot of challenges with it. Pardon me. The automation of work is something that's happening really big time that I don't think we're thinking about a lot. But a lot of our blue-collar jobs are under threat. Both blue-collar and also paraprofessional white-collar jobs are under threat by the advent of artificial intelligence and automation of work. In the freight industry alone, for trucking, with driverless car systems coming on board, you can see a lot of change happening, and the forecasts are in the next 10 years that we're going to begin to be seeing that. I know sometimes that's hard to think, but again, think back about your smartphone, how we could not have envisioned that we would have this computer in our palm of the hand, and then all of a sudden we had it. More computing power than the original Apollo spacecraft. And then more in terms of the structure of our cities, the transformation of brick and mortar retail is a huge one right now. We all probably know somewhere, if not here in Oregon, somewhere in the country, some 1980s enclosed mall that is now dead or has been torn down. The one where I grew up with is no longer even there. It's a piece of bare land right now. Retail is under huge changes with Amazon Prime and developments like that. It doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of possibilities out there for retail. Indeed there are, but they're more niche markets, more specialty kinds of phenomenon. And how does that play out in the physical structure of our city? Would you be planning for a large enclosed mall right now if you were in the development industry, or would you be thinking of other alternatives? The sharing economy is something that maybe some of us over a certain age aren't that familiar with, but I can guarantee you some of us under that certain age are much more in tune with. I think East Portland is probably one of the places where you're seeing that happening, of people eschewing some of the traditional things that we would acquire as we mature and grow up. So cars are being shared, houses are being shared, and that has an impact on the economy. Doesn't mean that there's not economic opportunity out there, but it does mean that the way we unearth that opportunity and build on those advantages is changing very, very fast. And the millennials, what can we say about, how many millennials do we have here in the audience? All right, and I should just let you come up and tell us how it's going to be. But I think that, and everybody chuckles, but it's really true. I do think this term here is kind of maybe a little bit disparaging, but millennial adulting or nesting. A lot of millennials are beginning to think about it's time to start a family. Maybe I will buy a house now. And one of the most fascinating trends in that is a lot of millennials are looking to places where their parents don't live, or where they can't afford to buy a new home, where affordability is more common, and they are looking at other areas. Plus, for a lot of millennials, it's a little bit of urban funk is a good thing, you know, a little bit of funkiness around the edges makes for interesting places. In my hometown in Bend, the ironworks and places like that are places where kids, young adults hang out. They're attracted to that, just like people are more attracted to diversity today as well, too. So as we look to that future, what is the economy that's going to attract and appeal to millennials? And should we not be targeting our sights on that economy as opposed to sort of not thinking out of the box and thinking that things are just going to continue as they have always been? As I like to tell my clients, cities I work with, even if your vision for the future is that nothing changes, you have to plan for that future, because I guarantee you, if you don't plan for that future you want, you will not get it. So that's the end of my little futurist motivation. We just want you to keep in mind as you brainstorm in a creative and collaborative way today that the world is changing and that it's always important to set our sights on the future. With that, I'm going to turn it over to bring our perspective a little bit more into the East Metro area and hand it over to Jarvez.
Myself, I'm going to be very quick because I'm going to move it right over to Dr. Martin. A couple of quick housekeeping things. One, there's water in the back, so if you get a little thirsty, feel free to grab a sip. And since you've already grabbed a sip of water, if you need to go to the restroom, some of those are right over here, right onto your right, my left, right up against the wall over there, just so you know that those are there. But a couple things I wanted to say, just a quick kind of snapshot about the region, and kind of in a way I'm sort of preaching to the choir. The choir is here, and so I'm going to preach to you a little bit, but not very much because you guys have to sing the choir stuff, so I'm going to let you sing that piece. But I just want you to understand that there's a lot of great things going on in the region of which you know, and a lot of people who are working those wonderful things are right here in this room. So if there's some things that you have questions about in the region, there's somebody in this room that you can talk to about. So if you want to know, hey, how's that Rockwood Rising project going? I mean, I heard it's going to be doing some really cool things there, and I want to know some more about it. Well, there's somebody here that knows something about Rockwood Rising. If you're like, hey, man, I wonder about what's going on with the Trip properties. I heard there's this might be going on or that might be going on. Well, hey, there's people here from Childale, from the port you can talk to about that. So you want to know about what's going on in Gresham Vista. You want to know what's going on at the Childale Airport or the urban renewal area. You want to know about what's going on at with the dog park and what the tribe is doing in that area. You want to know about the main streets of Halsey and what's going to be going on with that collaboration. There are people here that are working on each one of those projects. Right? And those are just, to name a few, just right that you can see just walking out of this door and driving a few miles in either direction. We have a lot of really things happening. We have a lot of growth in the area. And to be able to see all the really cool things that each city is working on, that each community is working on, that each jurisdiction is working on. Metro is working on things. Okay, a lot of really cool initiatives coming out of what Metro is doing. The state has some things going on, transportation, ODOT, other projects, the county. And so we have all these different jurisdictions that are doing some really cool things out here that are trying to leverage the assets that we have. And this is a real important time for us to take a look at that and take a second. If you're really working on something, this is a really great opportunity to take a look and say, hey, what does somebody else have going on right now. So I want you to take time today as you listen to the presentation, and you're going to get some really good data. How many of you like data? Okay, so what we're going to do is one hand for data, and then one hand for data. So if we got data, who likes data? Okay, who likes data? Are we? Yeah. Because that was one thing that we found when we were thinking about this event. We're like, what is the information that we need to even think about pretending to prioritize some of the work that should be doing. And we thought it'd be great to really take a lot of different information, a lot of different plans that are out, because that's one thing that we noticed when we looked at the area is that there were a lot of plans. And there are plans, and all the plans were slightly different, but all of them really addressed some of the things that we wanted to make sure we talked about when we looked at growth. So we had strategic plans, we had transportation plans, we have, of course, the world famous East Metro Connections plan, which we always love. We have those different regional development plans. There's, of course, some other ones that are there, but we want to really take what would it look if we took all those plans and kind of looked at them together and looked at the 30,000-foot view and took a look at the forest rather than just looking at the individual tree that's in front of us. So I'm going to bring to the stage Dr. Sheila Martin, Director of the Institute of Metropolitan Studies at Portland State, to really talk about, to give us a current conditions report, and she's going to bring forth a lot of data as well as a lot of data for those who like both. So give Dr. Martin a big round of applause. Dr. Sheila Martin.
Thanks, Jarvez. So I think my job today is to get you all on the same page about where we are in the state of the region. And there's a lot of danger in this. First of all, even though I am a self-admitted geek, not everybody is accustomed to looking at this volume of information, especially this early in the morning. So there's a lot of information in your packets, and I'm not going to go through all of it because that would be deadly. But I'm going to try to just bring forward some of the key things that I saw in some of the information so that we get a starting place for asking where we are, what are our key assets, as Jeremy encouraged us to think about, and where do we want to be. So this is just a set of information for starting with where are we now. And I want to thank Gabriella and Jordan, who are somewhere in the room here, for they've been helping me put together the set of information over the course of the last few weeks, as well as the steering committee helped challenge me to ask the right questions. But part of the danger is, first of all, I don't know the community as well as you do. And so a lot of the information I'm going to present, first of all, won't be surprising to you. You're going to say, well, yeah, of course, we knew that already. But here it is in black and white and other colors. And second of all, you're going to say, but what about, but what about, but what about? And I can't answer all those but what abouts because we'd be here all day just examining data. But I certainly encourage you to take a deeper dive into some of these issues as you're thinking, as over the long term, we're thinking about how to put these key initiatives together. We might want to have a little bit more detailed information about what's going on. So let's get started. And I want to start just by orienting you a little bit with a super geeky thing called a PUMA, which is a public use microdata area. The reason I have to bring this up is because this is the census geography that we used for most of the data that I'm going to present to you today. And it isn't completely coterminous with the area that's served by the East Metro Economic Alliance, but it does a pretty good job of covering the part of the region that we want to talk about today. So it's a pretty good approximation. And through most of this, for most of this data, I am going to be using census data from the American Community Survey that pulls together 5 years worth of statistics into a single statistic. And the reason for doing that is because a lot of this data has a large margin of error. And in order to reduce that margin of error and get a little bit better precision, we have to aggregate those data. So with those caveats, let me just get started here. So we're going to start with demographics, and what you're seeing here is population for that public use microsample area going back to 2012. The definition of it changed, was different before 2012, so I can't use this geography to go back farther than that. But one of the things that we know is that the recession really cooled population growth, and that was everywhere, not just here. And so there wasn't a lot of growth during this particular time. But then looking at the individual cities, we can see that most of the growth was in Gresham, which is the bigger area to begin with. And so really most of the population growth happened in Gresham, about 4,000 people between 2012 and 2017. And then going back farther, we can see that there was really rapid population growth during the 90s, and that slowed a little bit from 2000 to 2010. So this is a population pyramid, and if you haven't ever seen one of these before, I know many of you have, but some of you haven't. It's really just two bar charts put on their side. So the left-hand side is the men, the right-hand side is, or girls. I walked into the girls' room earlier thinking, wow, it's been a long time since I thought of myself as a girl. Anyway, the right-hand side is the females, and so each bar represents a 5-year age increment, except for the one at the top, which has a lot more females than males, and that's always a little depressing, but very common. So you know, it's an interesting way to think about the age profile of your region. And the age profile for this area is a little bit different than what we typically see for like the metropolitan area or even for the whole county. And the reason is because it's a little more straight up and down. Usually we see this big bump in the baby boomers and a big indentation afterwards. And that just demonstrates that there is a strength of youth in this region. And so as someone mentioned earlier, your youth is strength here. The other thing I want to point out that's on this slide is that East County has a larger average household size than the city or the county. And so you've got the city of Portland or Multnomah County. So you've got a younger population with larger households and families. And, you know, sort of think about that as one of the assets that we have to work with. And as was mentioned, East County is more diverse than Multnomah County. And even though I don't have, I have a really cool dynamic map on our website that shows how the entire Portland metropolitan region has changed with respect to race and ethnicity over time. And it has definitely gotten more diverse, but geographically, things have also changed. So East Metro has become more diverse, while some of the other parts of the region have actually become less diverse because of the change in the economy and the price of housing that have forced some lower income communities out of the central Portland area. Okay, place of birth. I have to catch up with my notes here. 84% of the population in East County is native born, but about 16% of the population is foreign born. And, you know, that includes people who are here with permanent residency, visas, work permits, and undocumented status, as well as people who have been naturalized. Now, about a quarter of the people in East County speak a language other than English at home. Now, think about that as one of the challenges that a number of the people living here are dealing with as far as pursuing economic opportunity. And there's a variety of languages here. And among those who don't speak English at home, they're about evenly divided between those who speak English very well, despite the fact that they don't speak it at home, and those that don't speak English very well. So a number of folks dealing with a language barrier to opportunities in education and economy and just everyday living. So this chart shows the distribution of income for households in the county, and I just want to note that these little bars, these little skinny bars on top of the green bars, are the margin of error, and I often add those to charts when it's important for people to understand that, especially if they're comparing across groups or across time, sometimes we don't really know whether one estimate is different from another. So just keep that in mind as you're comparing some of these statistics. We see here that almost 7% of the households have incomes less than $10,000, and actually a fairly significant number of households with incomes over $100,000, about 18%. Compared to the county overall, there are fewer households on the very high income scale. And since households are larger than average, the per capita income is lower, significantly lower, even though the median household income isn't that much different. Okay. So we've, poverty rates in East County are actually 15.4%, but 27% of children are living in households that are making incomes below the poverty standard. And just a couple comments on that. First of all, it's common for the poverty rate among children to be higher than the poverty rate overall because they tend, I don't know, I'm a parent. Kids can make you poor, It's tough raising a family, right? And with the exception of some of our Asian communities, people of color experience much higher rates of poverty. Now, another thing that I just want to note is that comparing someone's household income to the poverty standard is a pretty low bar. If we look at other ways of understanding how people make ends meet, we come to understand that it really takes a lot more than the poverty income in order to be able to pay your bills without having help from either the public or your family or from some other place. So there's a standard called the self-sufficiency standard, and one of the things we know is that in our state overall, only about 2/3 of the households in our state, and the same is true for our county, are making enough money to make ends meet without some kind of help. So that's a little bit different way to look at the adequacy of someone's income. Okay, so let's move on to education and workforce. Educational attainment is so important in terms of understanding the assets that we have to work with for educational attainment. I can't stress this enough, that really human capital is the important raw material that is important for our economic future. And educational attainment is commonly measured as the percentage of the population with a bachelor's degree or more. And it's a little lower in East County than it is in the county as a whole. And in the city of Portland, this number has gone up quite a bit over the last 10 years. And you'll see at Multnomah County, it's over 40%, but in East County, we have quite a bit lower rate of bachelor's degree or more. Now, the four-year cohort graduation rate is the percentage of students that begin high school as freshmen and graduate 4 years later. This is a standard that's been commonly adopted across school districts for measuring success in educational attainment in K-12. And the goal that's been set is about 75%. It depends on who you talk to whether that's the right goal. The 2020 40-40-20 standard that's been introduced at the statewide level would envision that that we have no one that hasn't graduated from high school. So that's really the aspirational goal. And some of our school districts here in the east part of the county aren't doing a very good job, although those rates are improving. So we have to count that as a bright spot, that the 4-year cohort graduation rates are improving. And the reason that this is so important is because if kids don't graduate on time, they're far less likely to go on to higher education. And this slide demonstrates some of the challenges in meeting that goal of getting kids through high school in 4 years, and that is the percentage of English language learners. Centennial and Reynolds have very high percentages of English language learners. Almost half of the Reynolds students are students who are not native English speakers. So this is enrollment for Mount Hood Community College, one of your important assets in this community. And the declining enrollment is not unusual. PSU is also experiencing declining enrollment. Very typical in times of economic growth, when it's a lot easier for people to find employment. Wages are starting to creep up, and so it's a little bit difficult for people to decide to stay with their educational program, and instead they may be choosing employment instead. And here's a chart that shows Mount Hood Community College's completions by type. Career technical students that get some kind of a credential that leads them into a career path. Transfer students who are going to be going on to a 4-year degree, and certificate students that take a short-term credential that can be a signal to an employer that they're skilled in a particular area. So there's been a steady growth in completions, with career and technical degrees the largest share, and almost 2,000 completions of degrees last year, with 60% career and technical, 20% transfer degrees, and 21% certificates. So let's move on to housing. The American Community Survey counted about 67,000 households in the region, with about 57% of them owning their homes, and a 94% occupancy rate. So there's only about 6% of the housing units that didn't have someone living in them. Let's see. About 70% of the housing stock is single unit homes, so that's a really high percentage, with about 27% multi-unit and 5% mobile homes. Now, we all know that rent has been rising throughout the region due to increased demand. As we came out of the recession, we were just slammed with this increase in demand for housing because millennials were starting to adult, and because we had a lot of people moving here. There's just a very fast household formation rate, and practically nothing being built during the recession. And so it's taking a while for housing to catch up with the demand. So this growth in median rents despite the growth in median rent, it's still lower in the East County region than it is in the rest of the county and in the metropolitan statistical area. So this shows the cost burden. 31% of owner-occupied households living in their owned home are cost burden, but 58% of renters are cost burden. That's a huge, huge percentage. That means they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So these data come from the 5-year American Community Survey, so it is a bit out of date, but it does show that on the higher end of housing value, it's pretty low, and most of the housing falling into this middle area of $200,000 to about $400,000 in terms of the value of homes. Using more recent data, we see that in the last 2 years, 85% of sales have been for single-family homes. And so there seems to be a lack of listing and sales in the townhouse and condo types. And so this seems like an opportunity to diversify housing types in the region as a way to, fill in some of the, for some of the demand that we see. Okay, let's talk about your employment profile and industry profile in the region. Oh, and I just want to mention just one more thing about housing. In your packet, there's maps of all the multifamily and affordable housing in the area with a count of new permits. Permits for over 200 new multifamily units have been issued from 2014 through the third quarter of 2017, and almost 500 single-family homes. So if I put that map up, you'd all be staring at it forever, but please take a look at it before you go into your breakout groups. So with respect to industrial structure, when we look at broad sectors of the economy, and these are broad sectors, manufacturing, as someone has already mentioned, is a really important part of the employment base here. And it's even more important than healthcare and social assistance and educational services and retail. This is important to note because nationally, manufacturing employment is declining, and it's only about 10% of the jobs nationally. But in this part of the county, we're really holding our own in terms of manufacturing jobs. But that ratio is likely to change as health, social services, and some kinds of retail were some of the fastest growing subsectors, and these are now smaller, like 3-digit industry sectors, and they're some of the fastest growing subsectors in the economy over the past decade. In terms of the total number of jobs gained and lost, educational services lost the greatest number of jobs, even though it's a really important sector here. Social assistance and ambulatory health care gained the most, and there were also a couple of manufacturing sectors that gained many jobs, notably computer, electronic, and electrical and transportation, as well as food and beverage. Okay, now, these are location quotients. And what a location quotient measures, I hope you can all see this. You have it in your packet. So I realize it's a lot of bars and a lot of numbers. But if a location quotient is 1, that means that the share of that industry that is in your economy is the same as it is nationally. So if you have 15% manufacturing in your economy, and the national economy is 15%, then your location quotient is 1. So if you have a higher than 1 for your location quotient, that means you're relatively concentrated. You've got some kind of advantage in that industry. And so these are industries that East Multnomah County is most concentrated in compared to the nation. And I've included the comparable numbers for the metro area so that you can see some of these are really important clusters in the metro area, and you can see where you fall compared to those metro clusters. So relatively concentrated in crop production, and of course, these are going to be very familiar to you if you know about what the important companies are in your area: couriers and messengers, computer, electrical, and transport. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that computer electronic products manufacturing, this is 334, which is like the semiconductor manufacturing. This is different from this industry, which is a more aggregate industry that includes other kinds of manufacturing, including transportation equipment. So even though East County is less concentrated in chip manufacturing, it's got this other type of manufacturing in electrical and transport equipment. It's a broader measure of that advanced manufacturing sector that's really strong here. So that's a lot of food for thought for you. Okay. The highest wage industries, including utilities, public safety, executive, they pay more than those industries, many of those, they pay more than those industries pay around the country. So we've sort of compared the average wage to the average wage nationally. And these are the highest paying industries, and you can see how many people are employed in those industries. And here are some of the lowest wage industries and how they compare to the US average. And one of the things that is interesting here is that some of the fastest growing, highest employment industries are also some of the lowest paying. So this is one of the things, the phenomenon that we see nationwide, not just here, is that we're growing in high wage industries and we're growing in low wage industries, but sometimes that middle is hollowing out. And that's certainly true in our region, in the Portland area, as well as nationally and here in East Multnomah County. So this is the buildable land inventory. And an estimate of the new jobs coming online from some of your more significant employment lands. So I just wanted to give you a sense of where there's opportunity and where some of these new jobs that are just coming online are coming from. And there's a lot more statistics, and I want to thank some folks from Metro are here. We rely on Metro for that information on the buildable lands inventory, and they were kind enough to share early versions of that BLI with us for this purpose. I'm almost finished. Hang on, hang with me just for a little bit longer. We're going to talk about transportation, how people get to work, how they get around. And what we know is that most people here, like most places in the United States, most people in East County drive alone to work. Only about 7% are using public transport to get to work. Most households do have a vehicle available. That's what the left chart shows. There's only about 3% of households that don't have a vehicle available to them. And then we also see that more people take the bus than take rail. Now, one thing to note about that chart on the right-hand side is that people can ride both bus and rail, and so we couldn't make a pie chart out of that because it would be double counting. This map, I'm very proud of this map. It's a very cool map. It shows the job locations of people who live in East County. So you can see where people need to get to. So we used a yellow dot to denote job locations with at least 15 people. And then the heat map shows the density of jobs for locations with fewer than 15 people. So this is for all the people who live in East County. Where are they commuting to go to work? And from that same data, then we calculated this inflow-outflow analysis, which shows that there's only 15,000 people who both live and work here. There are 50,000 workers who live in East County but work outside the county, and 35,700 who work here but don't live here. So this seems to me like a huge opportunity. Okay, that was a lot. I apologize for all the data. But there's a lot more to dive into, and if you have questions, I'll be floating around during the breakout sessions. If you have any more questions about the specific data, I'll do my best to answer any questions you have. Okay.
Well, in the words of the famous words of David Fizdale, new coach of the New York Knicks, take that for data. So we're going to have an opportunity for you all to speak and have an opportunity for a discussion, and I'm going to bring up Stephen help lead that, who's also going to bring up our president, Sue O'Halloran. We're excited and thank you so much for your work that you've done in leadership with this, as well as for your sponsorship as well. So like I said throughout, we're always going to be thanking our sponsors, and thank you to Metro as well for providing that our data, whichever you prefer, as well as a sponsorship as well. So Stephen?
Thanks, Jarvis. As an old Star Trekker, I'm a big fan of data. Come on up, Sue. Oh, okay, great, good. Okay, great, good. Well, we'll give you the mic in just a second. So we do have about 15 minutes here before we go into our breakout session, or before we move into our breakout session, so we have a little bit of time. We've really fed you a lot of information here, both on how the bigger world is changing, some of the unique assets of East the East Metro area, and finally, just a treasure trove of data. I think I just want to shout out again to Sheila and her team who did this. This is a lot of information. It took a lot of work to assemble this data for this unique collection of jurisdictions. So it's really good. So I encourage you to, when you get a chance to go back, take a look at it again, keep it handy, because you may find other opportunities to use it as well too. And I believe it'll be in part of our final packet or information that we share at the end of this project. So we've asked Sue to lead with a question, and then we're hoping that kind of warms you guys up, and we'll just be passing the mic here for the next 15 minutes.
Okay, I didn't actually think about loud enough.
But maybe for the cameras.
Okay, oh, yes, I forgot. MetroEast needs to have the microphone. Marianne?
If anybody wants to write a question, we ask that you submit it, and I'll get it up to Sue, so I've got a card. If anybody's interested, let me know.
Okay, thank you. So, very thoughtful this morning, and a lot of these things interact with one another. So I've got a couple of questions here, and then maybe one more to throw in. So, but one of them that I think we heard all the way through this is that we're changing here. We're changing demographically, we're changing in diversity, and I don't know that we've gotten really a good handle on all of that. But what we'd like to ask some of our panel members is, how do we do the kinds of thinking to make the changes so we can take advantage of that for the economy, the prosperity that we're looking for here? So who would like to start with that? I'm going to pass it. Go ahead. So, changing demographics, and how do we actually begin to take advantage of that?
I think the first step is we have to be intentional about our outcomes. You know, if we want and be intentional about what kind of work and what kind of inclusion we want to have. It starts with representation, and then it kind of moves on from there. We have to be intentional who we invite. Many of you have gotten probably a few emails from me personally inviting you to this event, and I personally wanted to make sure I invited people who traditionally were not in the conversation, so that when we looked out in the audience, it wasn't just a sea of the same people. So if we want outcomes to work for people of color, then let's talk to people of color. You know, if we want black people to be represented, we want Native Americans to be represented, we want Latinos to be represented, let's start with having that conversation to say, hey, we want to create outcomes that are equitable to everyone, including you. We don't want to make decisions for you. We want you at the table to be a part of the discussions at the ground level. So I think that's where it starts.
And I'll add, I think Jeremy said it great. We have to lead with equity. And one of the things that I've reflected on recently quite a bit is the importance of remembering that, especially as someone who hires people, that that we have an opportunity. We have this incredibly tight labor market right now, right? And so there's opportunities now. A lot of employers are really digging deep into labor pools that they might not have considered before. There are initiatives, for example, for training and hiring people who have autism. There are Ban the Box initiatives. There are opportunities to give people opportunities that we might not have thought of before. And the important way to think about that is, let's not think about whether someone fits with our culture, because if they fit with our culture, that means they're like us. And we want to expand our culture to be more inclusive. And so I think that when we think about who's the right fit for our organization, we might need to think more expansively about that.
And I'll just add another kind of repetition in a bit, but more in terms of age groups as opposed to diversity, and that is, again, millennials. One of the examples I'm thinking of, I heard someone say the other day that the hottest new neighborhood in Portland is Milwaukee, meaning because of its price and its location and its attractiveness, millennials are moving there in droves. And it may not be the West Hills, it may not be Eastmoreland, but it has something that's attracting that particular demographic. And I would submit that there are many of those same qualities here in East Metro. What are they, and how can you take advantage of them? Because if you want to follow the demographics and follow the millennials, you're building for the next generation. Back to you, Sue.
And Jeremy, did you want to add anything to that? No, well, as Betty is whispering in his ear. So that's okay. This is also informal today, right? So, well, we'll let him escape this particular question, but he might have something to add to the next one, and you can elaborate. So we talked a lot about industry and the kinds of jobs that we have here, but also we saw and heard some emerging trends, and then we saw some things that are happening elsewhere that aren't necessarily here. So maybe we could talk a little bit more about those emerging industries and how we might go about pursuing those in the future. So who'd like to start off with that?
I can start.
Jarvis?
And I want to preface it by saying, I think, especially in these times, there is a very politically charged time. I think we spent too much time really focusing on the us versus them type of mentality between industry and citizenry, if you will. And I think there's a lot of wounds that need to be healed, in particular from the Measure 98 kind of fight and that battle, and this kind of need to put, if we do things that are good for business, that's bad for the people, but if people don't have jobs, that's not good for the people either. So, if you keep poking the bear to say it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, eventually people are going to be like, well, fine, it's my fault. I'm going to take my ball and go to a different sandbox or whatever, and then we don't have anybody to play with in the sandbox. So I think it's really about looking at the collaborations and different things, and looking at who's here and who's doing some really good things. We have a lot of things that were in that industry analysis part that's in your package. It is amazing to see kind of who's here, and a lot of times we don't always notice some of the ones that aren't the big flashy companies. Of course, we all love the big flashy Microchip. We love Microchip. Thank you for your sponsorship as well. I told you I'd sneak in all our sponsors in there. So yes, you see those type of industries. We have great manufacturing here. We have high-tech manufacturing. We also have a lot of food production and things like that out here. And some of those you see or you notice or you know those companies, and a lot of them, especially ones that may be over in around the Trip property, or some other ones that may be kind of nondescript, you'd be like, oh, I didn't realize that they have 150 employees, or oh, I didn't realize this company over here that does great roofing. Thank you for another sponsorship over there. It has a few hundred employees. You have a few hundred, right? 200, 300. Yeah. So we have a lot like that, but I think that's part of the fabric of this community. We don't tend to brag a whole lot about all the cool stuff that's out here, but it's okay to brag a little bit today. And you see those coming on. We have a really great collection of different industries here.
Travis, thank you for taking the first response. I had a chance to think about this a little bit. I think an important thing to remember is that our economy is constantly restructuring. And there are times when that happens really rapidly, and often that's, when we go into a recession, a lot of times when we come out of the recession, the economy that is recreated is not the same as the economy we had before the recession, and that certainly is happening this time. I think one of the important things or characteristics that a community can have that helps ease the pain of restructuring is resilience. And okay, what does that mean? Well, that means that, to me, there are two characteristics, and I didn't come up with this myself. Ed Glazer is an economist who's written a lot about economic resilience, and he wrote this study of the history of Boston on how the community of Boston reinvented itself over and over again through the course of huge restructurings. And there were two factors that were really important in that. And the first one was human capital. So smart people, they also benefited from a huge wave of immigrants. In their industrial days, they benefited from a huge wave of immigrants. They also benefited from these educational institutions that are cranking out really smart people. But the second thing is community commitment. So in other words, when things were going bad, people didn't just leave. They said, we love this community, we are embedded in this community, this is our home, and we're going to work together to try to figure out what's next. And so, there's another thing in here that I think is important, and that is not getting stuck in the past. So there's this thing that happens called lock-in, which economists, they talk about the QWERTY keyboard. It's like inefficient, but we got locked into it, right? Because everybody it was too hard to learn something new. But we don't want to get locked in and lobbying to protect things that in the long run need to change anyway. And so it's important to continue to evolve our economy and understand how we can develop our human capital and our collaborative skills in order to intentionally move into the future. Steve?
And I'll just add one thing, and this is a very specific idea, but I think it's a big one, and it's really a question. How many co-working spaces do you have here in East Metro? Anybody know? Co-working spaces. Does anybody know what a co-working space is? Okay. Few. All right. So a co-working space is a facility where I, as a sole proprietor or an independent contractor or someone doing a startup company, can come, plug in my computer, get a great cup of coffee, network with other people, and do my work. They are the hot houses of the new industries, certainly in the tech world. And so I'm just tossing that out as an idea. We probably have time for one more question, and we haven't heard from anybody in the audience. Is there?
While somebody's writing down, can I piggyback off that really quick? While you're writing your questions down, please raise your hand or raise your card up once you have that written down. But we do have to really invest in entrepreneurs here because we don't know what's going to be the next thing. We hope to plan for the next thing, and we think we know what the next thing is, but we have to encourage entrepreneurship and innovation and really foster that and be that fertile ground where entrepreneurs can grow. I'm really thankful for Rockwood CDC being here and MISO being here and SBDC at Mount Hood Community College really help foster that entrepreneurship part that we have out here to go along with our manufacturing and our education and help cement those by having entrepreneurship opportunities.
Not having received any cards, I'm going to move us along so that we keep on time. We're actually running on time here. So again, Sheila and myself and Jarvez will be circulating around during our breakout groups. If you got a specific question, grab us and let us know what it is. But I want to do a setup now for the next phase of our program, which is our breakout discussions. And then Jarvez has an introduction to do before we actually break. So don't leave quite yet. Again, we've got 4 focus areas. You've all signed up for one of these areas: education and workforce development, housing choices, land use, transportation and infrastructure, and industry and entrepreneurship. So your conversations will be focused on those areas. We're going to be asking you some questions in terms of that area. What's happening now in terms of strengths and weaknesses? It's kind of that assets question we talked about earlier. What are the big opportunities in your area to promote a more prosperous economy in East Metro, and how can we leverage that? And the third one is, and this is really the key question, what are some key strategic initiatives going forward that your discussion group is going to recommend? Because when we come back as a full group at the end of our lunch time, we're going to have you report out on a handful of those initiatives. So that's what we're asking you to do, really, is come back with 4 or 5 strategic initiatives for your area that you have discussed and decided as a group. Here are some things, ideas we want to push forward, and also who are the potential lead or supporting partners to make those happen. Your facilitator will walk you through all these instructions, including some examples of actually what is a strategic initiative. I'm not going to go over the ground rules, but just know that as Jerry was saying earlier, it's important that everybody feel empowered to speak up and say your piece and share airtime when you get into your groups. I think that will help your conversations go smoothly. We have some changes in the room assignments here based on what you've registered for. So for the group Education and Workforce Development, you're going to be meeting in the larger room, which is right around the corner. It's on the other side of this wall. And your facilitators will be Dr. Debbie Durr and Kathy Clevenger. For the group that's focusing on housing choices, you are going to be in the social media room. Oh, that's this one right here. Okay. Thanks, Marianne. And your facilitators will be Brian Monberg and Sue O'Halloran. For land use, transportation, and infrastructure, you are going to be in the computer room, which is back there on the other side of the food table. And your instructors are Chris Strong and Diane McKeel. And finally, for industry and entrepreneurship, you're going to be meeting in the conference room. And we didn't plan it that way, but that's the one with the big cushy chairs around the table, so you actually feel like you're in a boardroom. Just sort of worked out that way. Your facilitators are going to be Ken Anderton and Dan Cochran. Before we go, we want to do a shout out to the Boys and Girls Club, and then you've got about 15 minutes. We're going to try to begin our breakout groups. Marianne's giving me hand signals here. Yeah, yeah. So you've got about 15 minutes to move to your breakout groups, grab a little bit of refreshment, use the restrooms or whatever, and then we're going to start at 10:45. And when you're done with your discussions, in about 90 minutes, it's going to flow right into a working lunch. So if your group's taking a little extra to finish its work, don't worry, you've got some time to do that. But if you're really doing good, you can break earlier for lunch and you have more time to return your phone calls. I'm going to turn it back to Jarvez, and he wants to do a shout out to the Boys and Girls Club.
Yes, this is very much an interactive session. So if you thought you were going to come here, just hang out, listen to a few presentations, get some lunch, and kind of go home and not do any work, well, we fooled you. You got to get to be interactive and have a lot of input. First, I want to make sure I give a shout out to Pamplin Media and the Outlook. Thank you so much for the wonderful binders that each of you have. The Pamplin Media Group put that together for us, and we thank Steve Brown for his course, work with the board and with the committee as well. So if you see Steve in the back, give him a handshake and a high five. And thank you to Papler Media and the Outlook for sponsoring the package that you get to work with and take home and write notes with. But before we go to break, I want to bring up Aaron Hubert, the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Portland, who's going to talk to you a little bit about this wonderful facility. And we thank the Boys and Girls Club for being such gracious hosts and having us at this inaugural event. Thank you so much, Aaron. Give a big round of applause.
Well, we're thrilled to have you out here. Thank you so much for hosting your event out here. This has been remarkable. That book is going to be a tremendous resource, and Dr. Martin, that was really, really informative. Thank you. We're thrilled about this campus. I have a new term, Stephen, thank you. This is a co-worker campus, a co-working campus. It was set up that way. The mayor agreed to let this become a campus of service providers, and when it's complete, it will serve youth from 0 to adult with no break, no redundancy, and that's how you really get youth on the path to a future, is no break in the services. And when the Latino Network comes out here in the corner over here, they will have an early childhood program that will serve 0 to 5. We serve 6 to 18, and the alternative school, 7th to 12th grade, when they're done, come over to the club. And the Timbers gave us a soccer field so the kids have somewhere to hang out and the community can use. So we're thrilled about that. We work with the kids around education success, healthy lifestyles, and social emotional health, which is a much bigger deal today. We have a room on the other side called the Peace Room. It's a tranquility room for youth to go to. That's a new room. That's a new concept for us in dealing with adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And so lots of good things going on in the club. We have an incredible, I want to brag 1 second about our teen workforce program. We put teens to work at Timbers and Thorns games, and we're growing that program. It's made possible by Key Bank, and Bruce Whiting is from Key Bank here today, and without Key Bank, we don't have that program, and it's a remarkable program getting teens to work. So we're thrilled to have you here, thrilled to have you on the campus. This is a convening place. This is a facility here. We want to bring people here. It's amazing, and so this is here for the community to use to strengthen, and it's an asset. It's one of the assets that we have, and I want you to know that. So thank you. We're thrilled to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. As we were setting up, we were kind of disappointed because we had to put the ping pong table away. I was going to keep that in the back, and we had to cover the pool table, and I just kind of started getting lost in the club and started having a little bit of fun, and then they told me I had to leave because people wanted to lock up. But other than that, we had a great time here, and thank you so much for hosting us. The staff has been so great. We've got our technology. I want to also thank MetroEast Community Media, who's been our technology partners in filming this event. They've been doing a great job. Also want to thank some of the other sponsors that I hadn't gotten to just yet, but I'm getting to the rest of you throughout the term. I want to thank TriMet. Thank you for being here. And Tom, we will get that lunch together, so thank you very much for that. I brought my calendar. And also to Steve, I'm going to kill the name of Harper Hoff.
Peterson Regelis.
Yes, Harper Hoff Peterson Regelis. I always miss on the R all the time. I always think regalia, and then I get stuck in thinking about like graduation and that kind of stuff. But we really thank you for your sponsorship as well as Axis Design Group. We appreciate all the beautiful technology and the flyers and the artwork that's on your booklets are from Axis Design Group. They do some great work, and we really thank them for all their help. J.D. Hall and Associates, who I love because it's me. So I want to thank J.D. Hall and Associates for being a fantastic sponsor and doing great work with East Metro Economic Alliance, if I do say so myself. And thank you to everyone, Port of Portland. We really appreciate all your work, and thank you for bringing us Jeremy, our speaker, who will also be back in the afternoon to give a few words about the event. If you see Chris in the back hanging out from the Outlook, he might sneak you for an interview, so wave at him. He has a camera and everything, so wave to him as well. And I think I got through most of the sponsors. The ones I haven't, don't worry, I'm going to get to you right after our lunch, because we really appreciate that it took collaboration to make this work, and we're really excited for the work that you're going to be doing here in the next couple of hours. So you've been assigned or you've picked your focus groups. They are labeled. Feel free to get to those quickly-ish, mingle around and talk a little bit, grab a refreshment, answer a text, and make your way to those rooms. And we look forward to hearing the outcomes of the work that you're going to be doing. Thank you very much. Get you all to come back. That is fantastic. I thank you for all the wonderful work each one of you is doing. If you have a smartphone with you, as I'm pretty sure most of you do, can I get you to take out that smartphone right now? Okay, how many Android? We got some Android people in the house. Okay, iPhone people, how many we got? LG, any? Okay, anybody with a BlackBerry? Any BlackBerry? Palm Pilots, raise your hand. T-Mobile Sidekick, anybody? The Zach Morris brick phone, anybody got the Saved by the Bell? Okay, so you guys have done so much work. I want you to know this is awesome. It's a very interactive process. So each one of your groups are going to be presenting here momentarily, but you all get to be part of the process. So right now, I want you to take that smartphone, open up a web browser, and go to Slido, SLIDO.com. All right? When you go there, there's going to be a message that prompts you to enter a code. You are going to enter B, as in boy, Boys and Girls Club, okay, 803. Okay? This is where the interactive polling will come into play. As of right now, when you go in there, you won't see any polls because I have not activated them. So do not feel bad and say, hey, I can't vote right now. Okay, you will be able to vote. For most of the groups, so for 3 of the groups, you'll be able to vote for your top 2 choices. And for one group, because they were a little ambitious and they put 8 initiatives, you'll get to vote for 3 in that one. You don't have to vote for all 3, or you don't have to vote for 2. but there is that option for you to be able to do that. And what will happen is they will come up, they'll present what they talked about, and how much time do they have to present? What is it, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? You know, 5 minutes, you know, it's 5 to 10, but closer to 3 to 4 minutes, if you get my drift on that, okay? And there won't be much time for like a question and answer piece. That's where we'll go right to the polling. So once they conclude, I will be in the back, so you won't see me, but I'll be in the back. I'll open up that poll, and you'll have 2 minutes to cast your vote. Okay? So once that 2 minutes is up, I will close the poll, and you won't be able to vote anymore. But you will be able to see the results actually on your phone in real time to see, hey, here's how everybody else is voting. And then at the end, we'll display all of them. You can take a look and see how everybody kind of did as part of our recap at the end of the day. Does that work for you? Okay, everybody logged in. I'll keep that up so you'll see where to go log in at. And then I will pass it over to Stephen to help kind of quarterback the presentations. So thank you very much. Transportation goes last. So tell me which one you're going to do first. So go here and just go clockwise. Okay, great.
All right. For those of you who have this little illustration in your packet, we're going to go around the clock, starting at 9 o'clock. So I want to invite the facilitator recorder for industry and entrepreneurship. Hopefully you're done with your dinner. So that's right. Here you go, gentlemen. I'll give it over to you.
Thank you. I'm Dan Corcoran.
And I'm Ken Anderton, Port of Portland.
And we had some great ideas. Really, really terrific ideas. Some marvelous ideas. We had a great group. We had 4 fabulous ideas that are probably written down on a piece of paper or typed into a computer somewhere. And if they're going to come up on the screen, that'd be nice. Or if we had a list of the things that we're voting on.
I think maybe you might want to just start summarizing your 4 ideas. But you don't have the paper, do you?
No, but we know the ideas. So one of the big things that we tried to tackle in industry and entrepreneurship was the gap between the people that we have here in the East Metro area and they leave and go work somewhere, and then the people that are somewhere else and come and work here. And things that we can do to resolve that gap, things that we can do with the resources that we have here to grow up and educate and improve the workforce that we have here so they can meet the needs of or for workers coming here. And then how do we improve or market our area and the environment that we have to bring in other businesses and to promote the education and resources that we already have. So do you want to go through 4?
What's the 4th?
Yes.
Which one was it?
Capital resources.
Oh, well, we had one of our capital partners, Craft 3 in our group, which, gave us a good idea that in this area, if you look on the demographics, there's not a lot of capital investment partners or accountants or other professional services located in East County. And for example, probably about 8-9 years ago, Camas, Washington, across the river, had a Fisher's Investment locate to that community. We would like to see either nonprofit lenders or other financially related companies be recruited to this area to give more, live in the community, invest in the community, and be able to have access to the capital markets. One other thing I wanted to also talk about is the branding strategy. We felt there's a need to cohesively brand the East County. I know there's been a lot of conversation over the years of doing this, but this area has a lot of great attributes: easy access to PDX, easy access to the gorge, a lot of experience in manufacturing. We have community college, a lot of different factors, but largely that hasn't been brought under one unique identity for the region, a tagline of sort that we could rely upon.
And historically, we're fighting against a negative stereotype of the area also. So when people say, oh, you live in Gresham, or oh, you work in Gresham, that's not usually like, that's great, I'm so excited. That's usually a negative connotation. So marketing in such a way that we can actually bring in more talent, more businesses, and more industry to our area. And then have people that actually will live out here that work in those fields.
The other one was on education. We feel like there needs to be a dedication to a consistent funding stream through all stages of education in East County, all the way through pre-K, maybe even earlier, through community college. And having that consistent funding will help with bringing more education, more opportunities to this community as a whole. And as a business group and community leaders, we all can contribute and make that happen, but it has to also be really a cohesive strategy to do that. You have to have some thought around, it was, as somebody had mentioned, it was tough getting the Mount Hood bond passed. That funding strategy is elusive, but you need to talk as one voice, essentially.
So the four to vote on are industry and education, cohesive or unified branding strategy, capital investment, and the really great fourth one that our group tirelessly worked on.
Was that the branding part of it?
That one. So the industry and education, so job training. Hey! But here we go. This looks familiar. So we have industry and education, and then we also have entertainment, so that we can recruit and develop diverse entertainment options in the East County area. So there's lots of fun things to do and fun things for families to do, and becomes more of a community. Yes.
Tied to the entertainment strategy is we recognize millennials are the future, and other segments of the population. When we talk about also the branding strategy, what's going to make younger workers stay and work in the community? Not just find a job elsewhere and move elsewhere. What will bring them and keep them here to stay? And it's that, again, having things to do, entertainment we already have the Gorge, but what else is there that, breweries, places to eat, activities, what can be done to encourage that development as part of the overall planning process and recruitment process?
Perfect. There's your four.
So you have four: industry and education, entertainment, unified brand strategy, and capital partners. Ladies and gentlemen, please poll. And then you hit send once you've made your selection.
Supposed to vote for one or two or?
Oh, two, I think. Two. Jarvis is.
Jarvis is two. Vote for two.
Fortunately, we do not have the Jeopardy music, but just let that music marinate in your mind right now as you pick these choices.
The percentages are changing.
Make sure you hit send at the bottom.
This is like watching the three little cars race around the track on the Jumbotron.
Do you have the results in your phone? You guys didn't get to vote.
We didn't get to vote.
I know we didn't. We probably want to set it over. We can add your votes later.
Second one is brand strategy, not brand.
It's both. It's a grand brand strategy. Fantastic. So it looks like industry and education more support and collaboration between existing educational resources and industries already located here. So combining those two resources that we already have. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
We're doing education and workforce development. Do we have our presenters here? Education.
Because we were such an innovative group and non-conformists, we have 4 presenters, each are limited to 5 minutes. Stores, Patrick, 5 they're limited to 2 minutes each.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Great. These guys are coming on full force. Go.
So our first strategy is to enhance, integrate, and align systems of employers, educators, trainers, and anybody engaged in workforce development in East Multnomah County. And the purpose of this collective is to share data on workforce trends, to share data on employer needs, identify skill sets, and build education and training pathways to support the economic prosperity of local businesses and the families and the workers in the region. And we have voted for the East Metro Economic Alliance to be the primary convener of that organization.
My strategy was to try to incorporate more social service agencies working kind of collaboratively with the school districts that we have out here to try to provide as much wraparound service and support for the young people going to school, because that is their job right now. And in order to be successful in the job, we want to make sure that things outside of the kind of brick and mortar classroom are kind of going well for them. So that's kind of that strategy, and partner kind of taking the lead on that. I think we kind of looked to maybe Mountain Hood Community College kind of striking that conversation up and running from there.
Well done, Robert. Thank you. My bullet point, I suppose, or strategy, to shift the K-12 experience through curriculum and instruction that will be increased by being more relevant, so students doing and learning that is authentically preparing them for college and ongoing professional learning like certification and college. Collaboration is paramount between industry, its experts, and local business, small to large. Students discovering and choosing their life work will be a result of this. Students engaged in learning and practicing vital soft skills. The lead organization on that will be East Metro STEAM Partnership.
So my topic or strategy is around business incubation and innovation. Looking at helping to really grow business from small business, entrepreneurial businesses in our region that leverages both our cultural diversity, but also emerging industries and markets that are growing and prospering in our region, and finding more ways for individuals and small businesses to grow and help be part of those thriving markets and economies. We have some ideas that could include potentially businesses that are working in food innovation in the food industry, textiles, could be manufacturing, could be technology or professional services. And we identified a couple organizations. Mountain Hood Community College has an entrepreneurial small business development program, so they're a likely partner. And then also looking at Rockwood CDC and the Rosewood Initiative as well.
The one I'm representing is called Prosperity 1000. After the Great Recession of 2008, job growth was mainly in very low wage jobs and very high wage jobs. And we had a bottoming out of what we call middle skill, middle income jobs. And so East Portland was most affected by this. East Portland has the highest concentration of poverty in the state of Oregon. And having a job does not prevent you from being in poverty. So that's most experienced here. You'll notice the unemployment rate came out at a 20-year all-time low at 3.9%, and it doesn't help unless we can start moving people into middle-income jobs. So another fact to support this is that in 2017, for the first year since the recession, middle-income jobs started outpacing growth of low-income jobs. So that the time is now. Prosperity 1000 is a partnership that includes economic development, including EMEA and other agencies, Mount Hood Community College, other training programs, workforce development, education, and community-based organizations. And it's to bring to scale a program to help low-income people in East Portland to move into middle-income jobs and promote prosperity for business and individuals.
And our lead organization?
Work Systems.
We're done.
Excellent job. How about round of applause for this guy?
And it looks like we have our choices here. Financial literacy, healthy communities through food innovation, developing regional system linking through effective communication, etc. Prosperity 1000, shift 9 to 12, learning to increase, develop and support innovation and entrepreneurship, collaborative program to upskill current workforce, and partnerships providing social services. Three, you get up to 3 votes on this one. So, ladies and gentlemen, please poll. Jarvis, tell me when we've got everybody in. I think we're there. No, well, still a couple changes.
We are 10 more seconds if you want to hurry up and get yours in.
All right.
And we are at time.
Okay, great. So the top scoring strategic initiative is the Prosperity 1000 initiative, moving to middle skill living wage jobs. Number 2, these are in order. It's kind of close. Shift 912, learning to increase relevancy to college and career readiness. And the third top scoring is partnerships providing social services with education to remove barriers to education. And there are a lot of several strategies, a couple more that are in the 40s as well too. So good job polling. All right, let's move on to housing choices. We have our presenters here?
So when it comes to housing, you have lots of conversation, and so it took us a while to actually round it all down to where we could get some strategic initiatives. So we didn't actually get who was responsible, but we can probably throw a couple of things in here as we go. I think we really started out particularly talking about really the demographics that Sheila had brought to the table, the fact that just in Gresham alone, we had 4,000 people in just the last year or so, and only 200 permits going out. So that right away, and from people in the room, we recognize that there is a huge shortage in housing. But then from there, we began to really then also think about what is the wide diversity of needs that are here in our community, but we didn't really necessarily recognize them. So I think we had kind of a two-step. And do you want me to continue on, or you want to talk, Brian? Okay. You'll see number 1 and number 2, but I think they fit together, but we believe number 1 needs to happen first. And so number 1 is initiate conversation on housing types, bringing voices to the table from our diverse populations to better understand what the needs and the wants are. So that's a first step. And then the second step was to initiate the exploration of innovative housing types and choices similar to what we did with the connection plan, resulting in community consensus. So we think that's kind of a two-step process. We would see that EME could be a convener, but we're going to need all of the same kinds of voices at the table that we heard today, whether it's from the senior world, from the realtor development world, or the housing, affordable housing elements. So then our third initiative was to investigate available public lands and the opportunity to meet housing related to live and work. So Rebecca from Multnomah County brought to mind that they have a parcel right in the heart of downtown Troutdale that has the opportunity for some real development, what might be the best use of that land. And Multnomah County hasn't been experienced particularly in making those decisions. So here's an opportunity, but we recognize there are other public lands that something might be thought about a little differently than what it's currently. And I think Spring Water Plant in Gresham would be an example. So number 4 was to find best ways for speed and efficiencies in development approval. No surprises there. But we also thought we should be talking about increasing simplicity across the jurisdictions, because there are a wide variety of changes in different regulations, requirements across our 4 communities out here, including the county. And then lastly, we had brought up some ideas of looking at partnerships in financing housing, and the opportunity perhaps with something new in REITs, Real Estate Investment Trust, that Meyer Memorial is beginning to initiate, and also land trusts, land banking, other ways that one might think about a development of land that might be different than what we're doing, but we think what financing is key. So, Brian, you want to add?
I will just offer that there was strong consensus in the room to just recognize that there is a need for more housing in East Metro, and a strong desire to all look collectively at how to get there. And then I think the other strong consensus that we heard, similar to the conversation that started our day, was really to understand how equity can really inform that conversation, and really ensure that as we move forward with the process of a dialogue, that we really include everyone in that conversation, and seek out ways to really ensure that everyone can participate, as well as to recognize just the nature of households are changing. And we talked a lot about the youth and how many young are living in our community. We also talked about that there is an increasing demand for retirement homes and retirement services. So it's a very interesting mix on the spectrum in terms of age, and then also, as we heard in the data this morning, the diversity that is a real asset in our community, and really ensure that our new housing types can reflect all households.
I think we're ready.
You have it up. So the 4, initiate the exploration of innovative housing types and choices, similar to the East Metro Connections Plan did for transportation, that would result in community consensus. Investigate available public lands and the opportunity to meet housing related to where people live and work. Find the best ways for efficiency and speed in the development approval process, increasing simplicity across the jurisdictions. Look at partnerships for new financial models, such as real estate investment trusts and land trusts, and to initiate conversation on housing types, bringing voices to the table from our diverse populations to better understand needs and wants. two choices, or did we say one?
How many choices?
Two. Two. Choose. Okay, choose two. Well, okay, so it looks like we have three right now that are kind of in the 40s that are pretty even. The first, initiating a conversation on housing types, bringing together diverse populations, and initiate the exploration of innovative housing types and choices similar to the Connections Plan. And then the third that's right there is looking at available public lands. Yeah, are we, okay. Looks like tied, there's about three.
No surfeit of bad ideas, that's for sure. Okay, our last group is land use, transportation, and infrastructure. And Chris, and are you the Lone Ranger? Okay, great, good.
Well, I'm Chris Strong, Transportation Division Manager for City of Gresham, and I had the opportunity to facilitate the discussion about land use, transportation, infrastructure with Diane McKeel, who's not here. We had a really good discussion. I think we were able to cover a lot of different strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, as well as some strategic initiatives. So I don't have the sheet in front of me, but hopefully I can track what they were. So the first one we talked about was supporting transit-oriented development, looking particularly at a project like Main Streets and Halsey as an example of what we could do when jurisdictions coordinate together to look at innovative land use approaches, innovative streetscape approaches, and that could be a model for other arterials in the area. Combined with that was the idea of looking at zoning codes that could, changes in zoning codes that could help to spur different types of development along these transit corridors as well. The second one was looking at preparing and aggregating land use for larger scale development. So looking about what it takes to take smaller parcels of land, put them together to facilitate large scale industrial development, residential development. Also related to this was how do we get the ability to mitigate for environmental resource impacts when we develop. And so looking for what agencies could do to facilitate that as well. The third one was looking at how we can use technology to manage and improve the transportation system across all modes. And so this was a really interesting one, looking at anything from how our traffic signals work together to how we can improve information about transit, looking how we can improve information for freight, taking advantage of what the private sector is doing with the transportation network companies. There's a little bit of trepidation about what this looks like 25 years from now, but we felt this is a very important thing to leverage now. A fourth strategic initiative was developing a transportation hub at Mountain Hood Community College. That there's an opportunity where you have a vibrant educational center that can we take transit service, really focus it there, and have that serve at East County in a more effective way. And the fifth one, and it kind of relates to the first and third ones a little bit, was support enhancing transit alternatives through improved convenience, security, and speed. And so think about what we can do from a technology perspective, what we can do to reach new riders. There's a lot of opportunities to improve transit service in East County. While it was felt that we do have good transit service out here, that compared to the rest of the metro region, we're maybe lagging a little bit. And if transit improves in some way, that can help to achieve a lot of other community objectives. So again, the five were explore opportunities for transit-oriented development, looking at aggregating land use, using technology for the transportation system, developing a transit hub at Mount Hood Community College, and then support enhancing transit alternatives. Thank you.
And how many, Jarvis? Two. Here they are. Vote, please.
More seconds, get your vote.
The first one should include corridors of all kinds, not just max.
Correct, yes.
I second.
Okay, it looks like we're closed then. So it looks like the top one was developing a transportation hub in Mountain Hood Community College, and then exploring opportunities for transit-oriented development along MAX and other transit lines.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. And how about a round of applause for everybody? And Jarvez, if you could make your way to the front, that would be good. Dare I ask anybody what the top scoring idea for each 4 areas was? Does anybody have that command of maybe Jarvez? I think. Well, while he's on his way back up here, I'll just wrap up my part, and then we want to conclude. Actually, I think this would be a good point. We were going to ask Jeremy to share a few thoughts on his reactions to what he heard today, and I'll invite you to do that now, if you don't mind, just briefly. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think I'll be really brief. For what it's worth, I'm really impressed. Not that matters too much, but really, it was really impressive to see so many people come together in these different groups. And the energy, I don't know, I think people reported really good progress in their rooms. There was a lot of energy and engagement, and it looked like some good and honest conversations. There wasn't quite as much conflict as I might expect if you were digging really deep, but maybe it's the first meeting, right? And maybe you can get into some of those tenser issues later, because conflict is a good thing. Dealing with conflict in a bad way, not a good thing, but conflict itself, it's a good thing. I think, I was trying to think about how to be useful here. I'll offer two things, one sort of tactical and one maybe just a little more conceptual. Strategic initiatives like these require a couple of things to keep going in my experience. When we brought people together around big ideas, we needed to layer in a couple of steps to keep people at the table. And one of those is really defining what the goal is. So the strategic initiatives, I would say, are like big sort of visions of the types of things that you want to work on. The faster that you all can come to an agreement about what does success look like in the next couple of years, right? What is the goal? And then to begin to develop some kind of data feedback, some indication of whether you're making progress on that goal. Is the needle moving? So it requires a little bit of data and information flow back to you all. We built, when we had an opportunity in the city of Portland to take a $5 million federal grant that was designed just to upgrade energy efficiency in homes, the mayor and city council members and other people said, we want to see what we can get out of it more than just energy savings in homes. What else can we get in terms of jobs and business opportunities? And we put together a group and we defined what success in those areas might look like. Then we developed some simple data metrics that would let us know if we were making progress. And we convened everybody on a regular basis simply to look at the data, remember the goal, and ask ourselves, what else can we do? Honestly, it was that straightforward. I'm a fan of planning committees and advisory committees, but I'm even a bigger fan of what we call implementation and evaluation committees, right? So that's one thing to think about as you're moving forward. It's like, what's that next step? The second piece is just about connections and your relationships again. So my encouragement would be, I've seen some of these processes get off to a roaring start. Probably you have too. Is this the first time anybody's ever been at something like this? Right. So sometimes what happens is that we come together in something like this, and then we kind of wait to be invited back to the table. Well, what's the next step? Somebody's going to call me on the phone and tell me exactly what I need to do. That's not always how the most productive collaborations work. So I just want to point out that these things often work best when people just step up. I know I'm not a leader of this thing, but I'm thinking we could all meet at this coffee shop and dig a little bit deeper on this thing we talked about 2 weeks ago. That's often a really productive step forward, and your leadership is going to emerge from this group in ways that are right now unpredictable. So the organizers of this stuff won't be able to predict, oh, you're the person that should be convening the meeting. Those people are out there. You might not even know who you are yet, but if you feel called to contribute, to pick up the phone, to reach out to somebody, to follow up, do that, because that's what will make this stuff work. Last thought, just Jarvez has asked me to do something inspirational, not quite my forte, but I will say that what you've got here are some green shoots, right? Some beautiful ideas that are starting to poke up that you all can see and talk to, and now those things need sunlight and water and attention, right? They need some time and commitment and maybe a little bit of money. So the ways that you all can think about how to do that would be beautiful. They're great concepts coming out of here. Great concepts, and I wish you all the best of luck. I appreciate the opportunity again. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks. I would add to that too, there's that great quote that if there's one person smarter than any of us, it's all of us. And I think we really saw that happening here today. I was in all 4 of the conversation groups. The energy was palpable. And I agree totally with Jeremy. It is that next step is that's the challenging part. One thing I would encourage Amy to do is to get a press release out and, and to share the results of this. And speaking of sharing of results, we will be compiling the results of today. So number one, I want to make sure everybody just make sure that if you filled out an individual worksheet and you didn't hand it in, please do that, because we're going to compile all of those answers so that you can go back and look at the comments that everybody has made, in addition to the summary ideas that we just pulled on today. That takeaway document will also include all of Sheila's findings. Again, we found a mistake or two that we're going to correct in one of the slides. So that document will be coming your way within a reasonable period of time. So I want to thank you for allowing me to be your facilitator today. It was great to reconnect with East Metro. Met some friends that I hadn't seen in a long time. Got to say hi to my old neighbor, Earl Blumenauer. Meet a potential new Metro counselor and have some great conversations with all of you. Special shout out to our facilitators and recorders. You did an excellent job. And I'm going to hand it back to the man here. Thanks so much.
And then you all will be getting some information sent to you, an actual physical infographic which shows some of the results. And I actually will try to see if I can export it here. And I just might be able to show what it would look like when you get this. Okay, it's almost going to show, but don't worry, we'll send you the full report later, so it looks a little bit nicer. But on your phones, I'll open up each of the polls really quick so you can see what happened with each one of these. So in industry and entrepreneurship, you can see that on your phone, and I can even turn this one back on.
So these are our top ideas.
Yes.
You mind repeating the top 4 scoring again?
All right, so let me get the present view so it'll look. Okay, so for the industry and entrepreneurship options, the top one was industry and education, more support for collaboration between educational resources. And in second place, we got, let me dismiss this. And in second place with 54%, we got capital partners, recruit core sector capital investors, and recruit resource arms to live and invest in the area. And a close third was a unified grant strategy, develop cohesive brand strategies, promoting the strengths of the region with businesses, livability, and natural resources, with 41 people in the voting for that one. And then as I click back over to the admin view for housing choices, all right, the top, of course, is initiate conversations on housing types, bringing voices to the table from our diverse populations to better understand needs and wants. And then a tie for second which initiate the exploration of initiatives and housing types and choices similar to connection plan, resulting in community consensus, and then investigate available public lands and opportunity to meet housing relative to where people live and work. And so, you're seeing a theme here with making sure we have opportunities available for people to live, work, and play right here in the region. All right. For land use and transportation, develop a transportation hub at Mount Hood Community College. And let's work on when we actually plan the hub to be at Mount Hood Community College, let's try keeping it there and not sliding it a couple blocks a different area. It's a little kind of jab. TriMet is gone, so you don't have to worry about the little jab for the bus rapid transit. Got to have a little fun out here. It's the afternoon on Friday afternoon, so we got to make it a little fun. Okay, and number 2 here is explore options for transit-oriented development along the MAX lines. We really need to leverage the asset that we do have in the MAX line, and then we have close third and fourth options that you see listed right there. And so finally, last but not least, all right, our education and workforce, Prosperity 1000 initiative, moving to middle skill living wage jobs. Second was shift 9 to 12 learning to increase relevancy to college and career readiness through strategic and appropriate collaboration with business and industry. And third, partnerships, providing social services with education to remove barriers to further education. So those were the top 3 from education and workforce. So before we go further, everybody just gives yourself a hand for being so interactive in this process. Give yourself a big round of applause. All right. And Sue, would you like to say anything before I dismiss everyone? Give Sue Allen a big round of applause, our president.
Well, of course, these don't happen without some great people in the background. And Marianne Gray, will you wave your hand? So Marianne owns Westside Secretarial, but she also serves on a number of different public and private organizations, and she is just truly invaluable. So I wanted to make sure we recognize her. And when we initiated this with a question, that question really rang with us about what's the impact. And so that's where our conversation led to today. But we couldn't really have done this, honestly, without Jarvez and all his leadership he's brought. But particularly, I really want to mention and recognize Sheila Martin here from Portland State's Institute of Metropolitan Studies. So with her, she led us to Stephen Ames, and Stephen told me today, which I had totally forgotten, we did a Vision 2020 for Gresham, which became Envision, and we have lived and used that document, and he was the guru behind the scenes. So that bodes very well for us for where we go from here. So we had a wonderful diversity of ideas and people from a number of different kinds of nonprofits and industry and government of all levels. And I really appreciate the commitment that you've given to us. And here at East Metro Economic Alliance, we are really now committed to taking the next steps and making sure we define the goals so that we get the outcomes and we evaluate it well. So thank you, Jeremy, for reminding us of that, as well as Stephen. And we started with equity, and I think that is what we want to close with, that this really is about social equity and recognizing what our communities are truly representative today. So thank you all.
Thank you, Sue. Just a couple of things on the way out. Make sure I wanted to thank the Boys and Girls Club for hosting. They wanted me to say a few words. Imani is the center director. You can see her out in the back. They're always in need of not only finances, so if you have a couple of dollars to donate in the till, feel free to do that. But they also need volunteers. They want people to interact and have impact on the lives of children. So if you have a few hours here and there, feel free to talk with them and think about volunteering. I want to thank all the sponsors who made this possible. I've got to almost everybody today, but I did forget to, I left out the county, and I apologize for that one. So thank you, Multnomah County, for all your work, like I say, even on the board and on the steering committee for this. And Commissioner Lori Stegman's office specifically for sponsoring this event. Unfortunately, she gives her warm regards. She would have loved to have been here, but unfortunately we scheduled this at the same time as a county retreat, and so the leadership of the county is on that retreat. But her staff is here and has been integral to this process. So we thank you for being here and being a part. I want to thank again, of course, Access Design Group for the beautiful design things that we have there. Microchip, thank you for your work. The East Metro Association of Realtors, we thank you for your sponsorship. We appreciate that. And Steve, I'm gonna get it this time. I'm gonna get it. Harper, Hoff, Peterson, and Regelis. Yes, we're in there. HHPR, that's how I remember it. But we thank you for your sponsorship. Metro and our Metro counselor who was here, we really appreciate all your help with this. Pamplin Media Group, thank you, Steve, for your work. Kohler Myers O'Halloran Incorporated, we appreciate you, Sue, and all the work that you've done with this. And TriMet, thank you for being a sponsor as well. And of course, J.D. Hall and Associates that provide strategic consulting to all your nonprofits. We really appreciate your sponsorship. But I want to make sure I thank everyone. But I don't want you to just leave here and go enjoy your weekend. I do want you to enjoy your weekend, but I want you to know that this is not the end of the work that we're doing. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of something new and something grand, and an opportunity for us to re-engage with everyone and decide that we're going to be an inclusive and prosperous region. This will not be the end, because you're going to get a report in roughly how long? Okay, sometime within the next month, you're going to get a report detailing all the work that each of you done. It's going to be a nice, shiny, have colors, all kind of really cool things in it. But then that's when the next question always comes up. But hey, what's next? And we will be your leader in helping you in that what's next piece. We're going to have opportunities for you to engage. So if you see Marianne in the back, if you're not a member of the East Metro Economic Alliance, don't worry, you can see Marianne, and you can become a member of the East Metro Economic Alliance. Now, a lot of you are already members, and you're like, man, well, what can I do if I'm already a member? Don't worry. You can be a sponsoring member and increase your membership a little bit, because your finances will allow us to be able to continue some of the great work that we started in these very rooms here today. And I would love to say we could do it without money, but unfortunately, we need a few funds to be able to continue the work and facilitate some of the things that we're doing. So feel free to upgrade your membership if you already have a membership in the organization. And third, as we work through some of these focus groups and develop lasting connections in those groups, there'll be some opportunities to work within the organization. So if you see some emails, if you get emails from me, you'll get plenty from me if you haven't been already. But read some of those and engage in one of the focus groups, engage in one of the committees, and continue to work in partnership, and we will try to lead in that manner to give you as many opportunities to engage with the public as possible. Whether it's you, another member of your team, somebody else in the organization, we want you all to feel a part of it. So thank you very much for coming. Have a great afternoon. Shake somebody's hand, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you for coming.